From John L. Scott in Shelton, it's Don Pannell, Riveting Radio Real Estate. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is a wonderful day.
It's a Friday here. We see that the weather's turning into fall with some rain in the upcoming forecast.
I've seen some orange leaves out there already.
I noticed
orange
that
and
too.
red. Yeah.
Brought my car in. There were
pretty.
some leaves on the ground going, oh,
Good.
man.
Fall weather, pumpkins, and all that good stuff.
I'm sure you have something that you want to talk about, Don, since it's your show here. But I'm going to take over for just a second.
Okay.
Fall, winter, still great times to list and look at houses because sometimes the summer, it's perfect conditions.
Right, but absolutely fall and winter is, I mean, there really isn't a set season anymore. I mean, people are looking all year round. So, yeah. And actually, we've talked before that fall and winter might be a really good time to look because then you see if there are leaks and all that kind of stuff. So
where rains will puddle.
Right.
Yes,
Right.
yes. So as a buyer, it's actually a good time to look because you kind of see what the potential is.
Right.
Because when everything is dry, it can look a lot better than it might
Looks
actually
golden.
be. Yes,
Beautiful.
yes,
Beautiful.
yes. But really, any time of the year for either buying or selling is. I mean, we're here year round. So
Yeah.
My
Very cool.
neighborhood in West Olympia, a house went up the other day. I guess 2 days later, there was an offer. Another house went up yesterday. So people are still listing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I have a couple more that I'm working on that are getting ready to list in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, it's still a good time. And actually even into November and December, it's still a good time. So
pretty cool.
Yeah.
What do you got for us today?
We are on the letter S, and I hate to say this, but I think this might be a two-shower because this one is a fairly in-depth one. It stands for seller disclosure.
Okay.
And that is a regular form that we have the seller fill out. And what it is a conversation basically between the seller and the potential buyer. And when we hand it to sellers, it can be a little daunting because it's like 6 pages of stuff that they have to go through and check off. And I always tell people that the reason it's so in-depth is because at some point,
There's been
all
a
of these
lawsuit.
things have been issues. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yes.
they rewrite this thing periodically and add things to it just based on problems that
And
they've
that's
run
good
into.
for the buyer.
It is
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
It is. And
So
it's
you
actually
know exactly what's happening.
good for the seller too, because
Well,
it
yeah.
forces them to sit down and really look through what's going on with their house.
Right.
You know, and it might help them identify things that they might want to address sooner rather than later,
Sure.
Yeah.
because you don't want it to come up as an issue when you're in the middle of negotiating a sale.
True.
So you want to look at it first. So I thought what we could do is to kind of go through that. There's different sections. I'm not going to read each individual one,
Okay.
but we're going to talk a
very
little bit
cool.
about sections. We'll see how long that takes.
Okay.
So the first section is title. So they ask you things like, do you actually have legal right to sell this property? You'd be surprised. Sometimes,
yeah.
sometimes not. And so, again, good to find that out now rather than
No, but my ex-wife does.
right.
No, I'm-
Exactly.
I'm
Well,
just
and
kidding.
that's usually what happens is it's a divorce situation and they haven't actually gotten the paperwork squared away yet, and so they get down to closing and they find out, oh gosh, I guess I got to track down my ex to get a signature on this because they're still on the title.
So if they're on the title and it's there's a divorce situation, you have to have both names to sign off on this?
Unless they've signed it over, done a quick claim deed or something like that to give it to one spouse or the other, you need to have both parties or all parties that are listed on the title sign all of the paperwork.
That
So,
makes sense.
yeah. So, and then also things like, does anybody have first right of refusal on this property? Have you promised it to somebody? Is there an option on the property? Has somebody put money down to hold this property? Is there a lease or a rental agreement on the property? Do you have a year-long lease and you want to sell it next month? That's probably not going to work.
Right.
So, and then also, is it in a life estate?
And we've seen a couple of those where they're like, there's a tenant in there. Don't disturb the tenant.
Right.
Is that situation?
But
like
I
that?
want to see the
Sometimes.
inside. You
Right.
know, and it's like the pictures, they'll just show the outside.
Right.
Let me see the inside.
And
Well,
we've
someone
had-
lives there. Well,
We've had a couple recently
you
where
have to move.
yeah, you have to actually write an offer before you can get in, and
Wow.
that's unusual, and I always think kind of risky.
Now, are you? And then, do you have
Interesting.
to give that tenant, a 30-day, or does the seller give that? Hey, we're selling.
It depends.
Okay.
It depends. It depends on what the language of their lease is. Sometimes you'll see listings that say closing subject to tenant's rights.
Right.
So if the tenant has a lease till the end of the year, then even if you close now, you're going to have to wait till the end of the year to take.
Okay.
Well, you have to wait till the end of the year to close or to
Right.
take possession. So yeah, you have to be aware of that. A lot of times, if there's a tenant, you'll see requirements for 48 hours notice or something like that, that's pretty standard.
Yeah.
But you need to note that on here when the seller's filling this out. If that is a condition, then the buyer needs to know that.
What if you're the seller? You own the home, but you have a rental in there. There's somebody renting in there now. I call Dawn and I say, Dawn, I want to go check this place out. You say, well, there's a renter in there now, but that's fine. We'll give them 2 days and then we'll go in, check it out. Now we go in there. The renter is there for whatever reason.
Right.
And they start just dogging the house. Or
Right.
they start saying, this is a terrible neighborhood. You
Right.
do not want to live. Oh,
Because
my
they
gosh.
want to stay there. Maybe.
Are there some legal ramifications for the rent for the person who's staying there that the seller could levy against the for
that's very
sullying
smart.
the
Yeah.
sullying
Yeah.
the deal?
Yeah,
maybe?
that's an attorney question. I don't. That's above my my expertise. But you're right. I mean that is possible.
Well, you don't want to live here. It stinks.
Yeah.
Right, because he doesn't want to move,
'Cause
or
you don't
she.
want- yeah.
Right.
I want to stay living here, renting here. So
Yeah.
I'm going to tell him, oh, roof's bad.
Yeah.
This leaks.
As their real estate agent, I would then go back to the seller's agent and say, hey,
You understand this is happening.
this is happening.
Yeah.
And then it's up to the seller to address that.
Sure.
So
Then
yeah.
you could evict them because of
Maybe say something.
maybe.
I don't know if that's an evictable. Again, depends on what it says in their lease.
Yeah.
That sounds like it would be,
Yeah.
coming in and trying to deter
Right.
people. That
Yeah.
shouldn't be legal.
It should be.
Yeah.
It should be the responsibility of the seller, and I always encourage sellers that I'm working with to do this, to make sure that your tenant knows
Yeah.
that you're selling the
We're
place
selling the house.
and this is why. And
Yeah.
and sometimes they'll give the renter first opportunity to buy as well,
Oh,
if they can
yes,
afford it.
yeah.
A lot of times they can't afford it.
Yeah.
So
And
but-
and then tell them, be prepared,
Yeah.
because the people
Yeah.
buying it may want to move in.
right,
So-
right. Yeah. Again, it's the communication is,
Right.
is key.
Very
you need to
important.
make sure that you're communicating all that stuff.
As we're going through this list, is this a legally binding document?
I don't. It's not part of the contract. It's a separate document that goes to the buyer from the seller. So, that's a good question. I don't know that. It's something that we have to provide. As the seller's agent, we don't provide this to the buyer in a timely manner, then it gives them a reason to back out of the sale.
But if
so-
they don't check something and knowingly uncheck something, is there a recourse? Or?
They always tell us as agents that we are not to be involved in doing this. We basically hand it to the seller and say, here is a document, to the best of your knowledge, you need to fill this out and make sure that you check every box. That's usually what happens, is it'll come back and there'll be boxes that aren't checked, and then we have to go back to the seller and say, no, you got to check all boxes. Every item on here has the option of saying either yes, no, don't know, or doesn't apply.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So you can check one of those, and I always tell people not to be afraid to say don't know if you don't know. I mean, you want to be as truthful
Yeah.
as possible.
Well, yeah, because the inspection's going to come in, and then
Exactly.
they're going to inspect all that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And again, I always tell people that it is just it's a conversation between the buyer and the seller. So you want to be, as the seller, you want to be as open and honest as you can be. As the buyer, you want to make sure that the things that are important to you are addressed to your satisfaction.
Now, have they always done that, or is that something new?
It's been part of the process ever since I've been involved.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, and like I say, it's changed 3 or 4 times even in that
Right.
time. So they add things, and I forgot to tell you the very first thing that they ask you is, are you or are you not occupying the property? So that's the very first thing
okay.
that you check.
Sure.
So Yeah, so it's and title is an important one, but then also remember that you have the insurance policy of the title company also going through and making sure, because that is a requirement of a sale, is that you provide clear title.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So if there are liens or other people involved, those kinds of things, those will come out in the title report.
Okay.
So you'll have
That's
recourse
important.
recourse at that point.
Yeah.
But this is a good first indication that, hey, if somebody checks that it's in a leasehold or a life estate or something like that, that's a good time then to say, oh, wait a minute, what does this mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
good.
sometimes again, buyers or sellers will check something that they don't really understand what that means. So then we can clarify a little bit and say, well, do you really mean that it's a life estate? Do you know what that is? And they don't, so they just checked it just because,
That looks good.
Yeah. So it's, again, it's up to the seller to make sure before they check something to understand what that
it is,
means.
yeah.
And then it's also up to the buyer to look through and make sure, first of all, that everything is checked, and then that it answers the questions that
And
they
shoot,
that
you
they may
can
have.
Google anything anymore.
Oh, right,
so
right,
you just jump
right.
on Google and see
Right,
what that.
right,
Put
right.
that in there.
Right. So the whole first section, which is like 10 or 15 items, all have to do with those title things.
Oh,
like,
okay.
are there encroachments on the property? Is there an easement involved? Is there a road maintenance agreement? Those kinds of things that are all part of the title report. So, and then the next one is water. So if you're on public water, there's a place to check that, and then all the rest of them you check don't apply, because
Which is big out here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sewer or well or public or
Right, exactly.
It's all different.
Exactly. So if you're on a public water, like city water or a water company, then a lot of these things won't apply because you're not on an individual well. So you're not
Okay.
going to be doing a lot of the things because somebody else is doing that for you. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Right.
but then it asks you like things like, have there been problems or repairs that you know of? Is there a treatment system on the property or not? Are there water rights? And that's a big one for some places. Not necessarily here, because very few people actually have water rights.
What does that mean, water rights?
That's a state issued thing that says you have the right to use X amount of water for domestic purposes or whatever.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah,
It's not
yeah.
waterfront access. It's the
No.
ability to have
Use water as
and somehow get it pumped.
Right. Most individual wells at some point would have had to have gotten a water right, but most owners now, or a lot of owners, have no idea when that was.
Sure.
or so
Oh, yeah.
Generations ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you check,
Don't know.
don't know or doesn't apply. I know when I was with the city, water rights was a big issue because there are people were trying to take back the rights that the city had because they said they weren't using them. Well, you don't want to give up anything like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it can be a big deal, but again, for most individual homes, it's not as vital. And again, most people aren't even going to know. So,
Yeah.
and if it has an individual well, you're probably going to be testing that water as the buyer anyway to make sure that it, because water systems or municipalities or things like that have a regular schedule of when they draw water and test it. So
Right.
you know that it's good because they have to test it every 6 months or whatever. But an individual
okay.
well doesn't have that same requirement. So you want to make sure that you have a clause in your contract that says, hey, I have the right to check that water and take a sample and send it in, make sure it's good. I've seen a couple of cases where the water does come back not good. So you want to be aware of that and then address it accordingly. It could be just a contaminated sample, but then
Right.
it also could be a symptom of a bigger problem.
So when somebody comes and secures your services and they're in the process of selling, when does this form show up?
When they're in the process of selling, if they're a seller, it shows up right away.
Okay.
When we're doing all the listing contract
Okay.
and input sheets and that kind of thing, I hand it to them and say, okay, here you go, fill this out, get it back to me. Then I scan it and have it as part of the listing so that agents can go in and print it, because there's a place on here where the buyer, when we have a buyer, this gets provided to the buyer, either from their agent or at some point, and then they sign
that they've looked at
that
it.
they've looked at it. Yeah, and then the seller signs also. And
okay.
Yeah, and again, I usually try and scan it and have it be part of the listing so that when somebody is looking at a property, they can print this off and look at it.
Sure.
Even before they make an offer, sometimes they can look and make sure that everything's cool. So,
Well, how can they get in touch with you then, Don?
this might be a three-timer.
I know, huh?
Because we're not very far into it. We're
But
only on the
it's
second.
important
We're
to
only on the second
have.
page. Yes, it is.
Yeah,
It is
you know.
very important
Yeah.
because and sometimes you don't get this for like estates and things like that. You don't get to look at this, so it's important when you have it.
Yeah.
So if people have questions or if I can help them, I can't help them fill it out, but I can talk to them about it. They can call me at 360-490-4493 or come and see me at the corner of 3rd and Railroad at the John L. Scott office.
Very nice.
Nice.
Well, have a great weekend.
I will. You too.
Good